Okay, so what if I told you there's a 14-foot piece of linen cloth, and on it is the faint sepia image of a crucified man? For centuries, millions have looked at this and believed, truly believed, that it's the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ. But for just as long, others have said, no way. They've called it the most brilliant, most ingenious forgery in all of history. We're talking, of course, about the incredible story of the Shroud of Turin. For a really long time, the whole debate about the shroud was pretty much a matter of faith, you know? You either believed or you didn't, based on old records. But then, in 1898, everything changed. One single photograph, taken in a darkroom, took this ancient relic and turned it into a completely modern scientific puzzle. So get this, an Italian photographer named Secondo Pia is in his darkroom developing his pictures of the shroud, and when he looks at the glass plate, he almost drops it. I mean, he was in total shock. So on the left, you can see what the cloth actually looks like. It's faint, kind of hard to make out, but on the right, that's what he saw on his negative. Instead of the ghostly, washed-out image you'd expect, this stunningly clear, detailed, and lifelike positive image of a man's face was staring right back at him. It was completely backward. It was like the shroud itself was already a photographic negative. And that right there is the crucial point. The image on the shroud behaves exactly like a photographic negative. This just shouldn't be possible. I mean, think about it. The whole concept of photography, of negatives and positives, was completely unknown in the Middle Ages. It was technologically unimaginable. And that's exactly when the shroud first pops up in the historical record. So the question is, how? How could this possibly exist? Now, even before this whole photography bombshell, the shroud had a pretty wild history. Its journey was, well, it was marked by incredible devotion on one side and some really intense skepticism on the other. This was never, ever an uncontested relic. Not for a minute. Let's just quickly trace its path, because it's pretty interesting. So it first shows up for sure in 1354 in a little church in France. And boom, almost immediately people are calling it a fake. Then, in 1532, it survives this really bad fire. That's where those famous burn marks and patches you can see on it today come from. A few decades later, in 1578, it gets moved to Turin, Italy. That's why we call it the Shroud of Turin. And it's been there ever since. Much, much later, in 1983, it was finally willed to the Vatican. And check this out. This quote really gets right to the heart of the controversy from day one. We're talking just 35 years after it was first shown to the public. A local bishop writes to the Pope himself, and he does not mince words. He says he knows for a fact it's a fraud. He claims it was artificially painted in an ingenious way, and, get this, that the artist even confessed. So the accusation that this is a forgery is literally as old as the shroud's public life. But, despite all those early challenges and accusations, the shroud's fame just kept growing. It ended up with the powerful House of Savoy, and its journey finally ended right here, in the Turin Cathedral. And that's where it became one of the most revered objects in the entire Christian world. All right, so fast forward to the 20th century. The whole debate basically moves from the cathedral into the science lab. For the first time, scientists were actually allowed to get their hands on it, to study it directly. Everyone was hoping they could solve this mystery once and for all. But what they found? It only made things way more complicated. Okay, 1988. This was the big one, the test everyone was waiting for. 3 separate, world-renowned labs were given a tiny sample of the shroud for blind radiocarbon dating. And the result? It was crystal clear. The linen itself was made sometime between 1260 and 1390 AD. And that result just blew the doors wide open. For most scientists, that was it. Case closed. The shroud is a medieval artifact, end of story. But supporters of its authenticity, they pushed back hard. They argued that the sample was all wrong, that it was taken from a corner that had been repaired in the Middle Ages. Or they said centuries of smoke from the fire and just being handled by people had contaminated it and skewed the dates. Now, it's important to say most experts reject these theories, but there's still a big reason the debate is alive today. Yeah, and even before the carbon dating, there was this famous microanalyst, Walter Macrone. He got to study tiny samples lifted off the shroud with sticky tape, and his conclusion was, well, it was blunt. He said, it's a painting. He found tiny particles of red ochre and vermilion pigment, which are exactly the kinds of materials a medieval artist would have used. But then, the main scientific team that studied the cloth, they were called the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, they came to a totally different conclusion. They said, no way is this a painting.
Why? Well, for one, there are no brushstrokes, none. And the image is unbelievably superficial. It's only on the very, very top microfibers of the linen. The color doesn't soak in at all. And then there's the weirdest part. The image has 3D information encoded in it, something you just don't get with photos or paintings. To this day, nobody, and I mean nobody, has been able to make a copy that has all of these same bizarre properties.
Okay, so let's just assume for a minute that the carbon dating is right. If it is a medieval forgery, then how in the world did an artist pull this off? Well, skeptics have come up with some pretty clever ideas. Probably one of the most convincing forgery theories comes from an investigator named Joe Nickel. Here's his idea. An artist could have carved a shallow sculpture of a body, right? A bas-relief. Then you drape a damp cloth over it and let it dry. After that, you just gently dab on a powdered pigment. The powder would only stick to the raised parts of the cloth, the parts touching the sculpture. And that method, it creates a faint image. It doesn't soak in like paint. And it actually explains how you could get that 3D-like information the scientists were so baffled by. Pretty smart, right? And on top of that, critics will tell you that the figure on the shroud isn't even anatomically perfect. They point out that the arms seem way too long and they're not even the same length. The proportions of the face and head are kind of off. And that posture, with the hands covering the groin, they say that would be totally impossible for a corpse in rigor mortis. To skeptics, these aren't signs of a miracle. They're the classic telltale signs of an artist making artistic choices. So, where does all this leave us? It's kind of a mess, right? We're basically faced with this huge puzzle, a series of deep contradictions, where solid scientific fact seems to go head-to-head with the physical evidence of the object itself. And this, right here, this is the absolute core of the entire shroud debate. On one hand, you have our most reliable dating method, radiocarbon dating, placing it firmly in the Middle Ages, no question. But on the other hand, you have the image itself, which has all these unique properties that we still, to this day, can't fully explain or reproduce. Not with medieval technology, and maybe not even with modern technology. So you might be wondering, what does the Catholic Church have to say about all this? Well, they actually take a very careful, very neutral position. Pope John Paul II put it perfectly. He basically said, look, this is not an official article of faith. The Church does not require anyone to believe it's authentic. Instead, they value it as a powerful icon, something that helps people reflect on the Passion of Christ, and they leave all the tricky scientific questions to the scientists. And really, that's a key thing to remember. For millions and millions of believers, all these scientific arguments, they're just not the most important part. The spiritual power of that image, what it represents to them, that goes way beyond the question of where it came from. Whether it's a real relic or a piece of art, you just can't deny its incredible impact. So, in the end, what is the Shroud of Turin? Is it the actual, authentic burial cloth of Jesus, a genuine miracle that defies all scientific explanation? Or is it the masterpiece of some long-forgotten medieval artist, a forgery so brilliant that we still can't figure it out? Or maybe it's something else entirely, a genuine mystery where the final answer is still out there, just waiting to be discovered. The one thing we know for sure is the debate is far from over.